Hey everybody, it's almost 10 o'clock. So this is my fourth live that I'm going to go over kind of what's happening with what I'm seeing with coronavirus or COVID-19 here specifically in San Antonio area. Um, and if for those that don't know, I'm an ER doctor. It's been a weird week. I've only worked 2 shifts since my last video, and neither one has been particularly that busy or bad. And I haven't seen a huge uptick in patients. This is very good. Um, and it's weird at the same time. I think that it is good because I think our social distancing is working. Um, we're seeing people stay home, and I'm seeing less, just cough, cold, congestions coming through. What I am seeing in my ER is the people are pretty sick. Um, but on the other hand, I am a little bit worried, and this may seem weird, but our ERs, the volumes are really down now. I'm seeing half of the normal number of patients I'm seeing. And what's concerning me about this is the folks that have heart attacks and strokes. Those people shouldn't be changing dramatically in the number that we're seeing. But we're not seeing those patients in the ER anymore. And I'm fearful that people are so worried to come to the ER about coronavirus that they're not coming in for the things they need to be coming in, for their heart attacks, for their strokes, for their infection that can turn into sepsis. And what I'm fearing is that we will still have this bump of coronavirus, in the next couple weeks. But then after that, this summer, we're going to have a horde of patients coming in who put off coming in when they should have, and they're really sick. So if you're having severe chest pain, if you're having a lot of things, please don't avoid the ER. We do need you to come in if you have something seriously wrong. I just wanted to message that because I think people are afraid to go to the ER for important things. And if you need to go, you need to go. All right, so in this video, hi, Stacy. I said that I would try to go through some questions that people had in my previous video so that I can answer some things that we're seeing. So first thing, I'm just going to go over kind of the statistics of where we are with coronavirus right now. In the US, we have hit over 400,000. That's a huge number. But if you look at statistically the size of the US, our patient population compared to, let's say, Italy, Germany, some of those other areas, the amount of patients per the population size, it's not actually that bad for the US. It's a huge and scary number, but our population is very large, and so that number isn't as scary as I think the news media likes to make it sound. However, our death rate has gone up dramatically. It is going up exponentially. That's what we're seeing with this virus. So now I think we're just shy of about 19,000 deaths. The good news is I think social isolating is working, and we're starting to see some plateauing in some of the hard hit areas, like New York and New Jersey, from what I'm hearing from some of my colleagues there. We're also seeing some decrease in serious illness in California. So these are good things. You guys are doing your part. That's huge. And they're starting to predict a slightly lower death rate, which is also good. I think that if we keep this up, that maybe we can start looking at some decreasing of social isolation in the next couple weeks. I, like everybody else, I don't enjoy being locked down, and I think that that is a good sign. That being said, I think it's going to be really telling after Easter. I think a lot of people are fed up of being stuck at home, and I'm a little worried that people are going to go and try to hang out with their family, and think that that's okay. And if you don't live with your family right now, you really shouldn't be going and hanging out with your family because, we're still in that critical time. So I think within a week or two of Easter, we'll kind of get a better idea. Did people really stay home through Easter? If our numbers don't dramatically increase, I think that's a sign that we probably should start opening them back up. If our numbers dramatically increase, then we know people didn't do what they were supposed to. Okay, so the other thing that we're seeing, so in Texas, I think we're somewhere in like the 5 to 6,000 range, I believe is what I was looking at. Maybe it's higher. And we've had like 200 deaths here in San Antonio area. We're still under 1,000 patients. who have been diagnosed. We have seen, I believe our numbers in the 20s, almost 30s of deaths. However, I get the data from our regional medical collaborative called STRAC. As a medical director, I get that data where I get to look at all the data for our area. And all of our hospital systems collaborate in that data. And what I'm seeing in the data, and they're showing, is that although our number of patients has not dramatically gone up, number of hospitalized patients has gone up. And the graph, when you look at the number of patients that are just kind of admitted to the floor, which is not that sick, and the number in the ICU, initially the floor was high and the ICU was here. They've crossed paths about 2 days ago. So now the ICU numbers up here and the floor patients are down here. So the people in the hospital are sicker. And that's what I'm hearing from my friends who are in Louisiana. For those that don't know, I used to work in Louisiana in Baton Rouge. So I have lots of friends that are working in New Orleans and Baton Rouge, and their numbers in the ICU are really high. The ER number's not as bad. Same with my friends in Houston. I trained in Houston, so I have a lot of folks that I know that work in Houston, and their ICUs are filling up. We are also seeing our ICUs at some of our bigger centers, not my particular hospital, filling up. And we're starting to see people end up on ECMO. So we're seeing that people get sicker, which is kind of par for this course, for this illness. So just some numbers and ideas of where you are. I think globally we're over a million. I believe it's over a million cases, and our death rate is over 100,000, if I remember correctly. Don't quote me on that. Okay, so some questions and things that people were bringing up. People were talking in here. They said that I have a lot of nurses and doctors that follow me on here. Someone was saying that they were seeing a lot of testing positive of young Hispanic males, and they were dying. If you guys haven't seen in the news media, it is hitting minority communities very hard. I think some of this has to do with the fact that those folks don't have the luxury to work from home. And I think it's really important to note that although people are thanking us in healthcare for being frontline workers, we've got to remember the folks that are the grocers and the people delivering the food and the people who have to go to work for essential things to keep our society running. Those folks don't have the luxury that I do, where I have the ability to have some idea that the person in front of me is sick, and I can gown head to toe and try to protect myself, even with my limited protective gear. So at least here in San Antonio, we're seeing grocery stores where people that work there are coming with the virus. And so, yes, it's hitting that population a lot, and that's one of the reasons. I was going to say something and I forgot. Okay, we'll just move on here. I'm going to kind of be all over in this video, but I just wanted to kind of address this different things that people wanted to talk about. So a lot of people were talking about how they're getting their temperatures checked before they go in and out of work. That is something I think is very important. I don't know how much it's catching, but at least where I work, we get temperature checks when we walk in. We have to put a mask, at least a surgical mask, on as soon as we walk in our entire hospital. Now, most of the US people are being recommended to go out with a mask. And why is this important? It's less so that we don't get it, but so we don't transmit it to other people. There is asymptomatic carriage of this, and there's asymptomatic spread. And that was something we didn't know initially. The other thing that I think is interesting is there's reports coming out of Korea now that there is reactivation of the virus. No one has asked me about this, but I think it's a good thing to point on. I don't think that's reactivation per se. I think that our testing is still very bad. There have been so many cases where we know that someone is positive. They have everything clinically and everything in their labs that say this is coronavirus, this is COVID, we know this is, and the test is negative. Either it wasn't swabbed well or something. It's the test is not 100% accurate. It's like 20% accurate, or not 20%, 70 to 80% accurate. So there's 20 to 30% of this time that is a false negative. So just because you have a negative test doesn't mean you're necessarily negative. And a lot of countries have different tests than we do, and their negative rate that's false can be higher or lower than ours. And so this is something to be aware of. So some of that, I think, coming out of Korea is maybe not that these folks are reactivated, but that their testing wasn't accurate. And when they were cleared, they maybe weren't shedding as much virus. And that is why it was not showing up on the test, and they were cleared, but they weren't really cleared. Now, what we don't know about these reactivation or poor testing or whatever you want to call them in Korea is we don't know, are they still really infectious, and nobody knows that, unfortunately. But that is even more evidence that we should probably continue to mask in public as best we can, even if it's a cloth mask, a bandana, whatever you guys have. So I do think that's an important thing to go over. um, let's see. I'm just going to look through. I have my tablet here so I can kind of go over. So someone said, I was wondering what you think about wiping down all your groceries and items that have been shipped with you. I'm not super paranoid about this. So the latest and greatest data that we have on this virus is that it only lives on certain surfaces up to 3 days. Occasionally they have done some longer stuff where they've swabbed in like the cruise ships and they found it up to like 7 or even longer. But there's some doubt if this virus is actually really that active at this point. Um, so yeah, uh, in cardboard and paper products, they say that it really doesn't last more than a couple hours. So that's why you'll see when in my last video I talked about putting our masks that we reuse in paper bags. That's one of the reasons those bags breathe and the virus can't live on it for very long. Plastic, it can live on it longer, as is stainless steel. So that can live up to 3 days. What I tell folks is, or what I do personally is like my boxes, I usually just set them aside if they're cardboard for like a day, and then I'm fine. And usually whatever's inside was packed up at least 2 to 3 days before that. So I'm less worried about wiping everything down. Now, if it's a plastic container, I'm ordering a lot off of like Amazon and other places just so that I can stay away from the general public because I am high risk for spreading it to folks just being in healthcare. Um, those plastic bags, I don't Lysol down, I open them. And then I usually dump out the contents and then wash my hands and throw them away and then wash my hands again. That's kind of the extent I'm doing. I don't have a lot of Lysol wipes. They're hard to come by. I'm saving those for my equipment and stuff I bring home so that I can fully Lysol everything down and not bring that stuff into my house. So that's my thought on it. I don't think you need to Lysol all your groceries down. I think in general, after you touch anything, you should probably just wash your hands. I think if people use that kind of logic, it's a lot safer than just, oh, I've Lysoled everything, I'm good to go. Okay, so um, let me move on here and see. I know someone had mentioned, and I lost them on here on my phone here, but they said that their company is doing video scanning. I think that's a really cool idea. We played with that idea, but they have one of those like thermal ones that they scan your head. Um, let's see what else. Sorry, guys, give me just a moment. Someone asked me what the make and model of my mask was that I showed. That was my half-face respirator. That is a Spirion. It's by Honeywell. Unfortunately, that one is the Blue Series. It's a VA model. I got it on Amazon. I found it through a link from my shirt here is a special closed Facebook group that I'm on that all it's like some 20 or 30,000 ER doctors around the world are on. And so we exchange information about this virus and what we're seeing in different areas and where we can find gear. And so I found that link from somebody on that website. Unfortunately, it's not there anymore. You really can't get any respirators off of Amazon anymore because they have finally locked it down and are only selling to healthcare entities. Um, but I would say check local paint stores if you're in healthcare and you need a respirator for those half face masks. Check Home Depot and then Google it. There are a lot of industrial websites that are still selling them on and off, but 3M makes a bunch of them that you can get the ones for. So I don't know how helpful that is to you. That was for MMMMD was the person who commented that. So Melissa Lewis was telling me she sprays down her mask with Lysol and then air dries it. I would recommend against that. We looked at all the studies, and I did a lot of this because our hospital is UV filtering N95s, and the data is not great for that. So there's a couple of methods that the CDC has played with or talk about on their website about how to sterilize N95 masks. And basically, what they found is there's really not a good way to do it. The most promising one is the hydrogen peroxide that you can actually make as like a vapor. And I believe there's a institution on the East Coast that is doing this, and I can't remember which one it is specifically. But the data is pretty good that it is not heavily warping the masks, it's not affecting the fit, and it seems to make the mask quite usable. Inside the N95, there is a special layer that is ionic charged that helps filter out the bacteria. The problem is if you put anything else on it, Lysol, bleach, soak it in water, you can potentially mess that up, or you can warp the fit of the mask. And so if you mess up the filtration, it doesn't work well for you. If you mess up the fit, it doesn't work well for you. And so those are things that people don't think about. So right now, the safest method is just to let your mask air dry for several days, as long as you can before you use it again. That is the least likely to mess it up. It's still not ideal. My masks are all 3M masks that I've been using, and 3M, if you go on their website, they have a whole page where they looked at all these studies on sterilizing these masks and pretty much said they all warped the mask in some form or fashion. And they explained what it did to each of them and how it affected the filtration. So if anybody is interested in that and is in healthcare, or their institution is implementing a sterilization process, please go and find that and take it to them. We did that to ours because even though I have my own personal supply, I worry about my nurses, I worry about my other physicians, I worry about my techs who the hospital is implementing these. And, we want to make sure we have the safest way to get PPE for our folks in, working in ERs, ICUs, and in my hospital. So, yeah, that is that. Let me see, moving on here. So let me see another question here. So someone asked, Glamgo asked, will the virus still be around when social isolation ends, or are we waiting for a vaccine? No, we're not waiting for the vaccine. The vaccine is at the earliest would be a year from now. And even then, it's not looking promising. They've done previous coronavirus vaccines, and unfortunately, when they did it for the normal coronavirus that it kind of goes around the human population, it just causes the common cold, it caused a cytokine storm and actually made people worse. So they were working on a SARS vaccine that recently came out, and let's see. Oh, hi, Miss Dill Pickle. Thank you. And basically, that one has some promise, but they're in the first phase of trials where they're testing it on humans to make sure it's safe. I think I read somewhere about 20 some odd folks that are working on coming out with vaccines. The problem is to make sure a vaccine is both effective and safe, you have to go through several rounds of trials, okay? So you have to try it on animals to make sure it's effective. You have to try it on people to make sure it doesn't kill them. Then you have to study in large groups to make sure that it is safe, it doesn't harm, and it doesn't have any weird side effects. All of that takes time. Even if you accelerate the FDA, even if you drop all the red tape, we're looking at a minimum of a year. Honestly, I would say closer to a year and a half or 2 years. So no, we can't stay socially isolated. I think our better bet of getting out of isolation sooner is the antibody testing. And this kind of ties back into some treatment stuff, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But there has antibody testing. Antibodies are those things that go around your body and fight the virus or fight the bacteria or whatever when you're sick. Vaccines usually cause your body to produce antibodies against that virus or whatever. And then when that virus shows up, your body already is prepped to attack it and get you better. So there have been some studies or some trials, and they've been very promising, where they're taking people who are already recovered for coronavirus, and they are getting their plasma, which is rich in these antibodies, and they're transfusing them to select patients who are very sick in ICU with COVID. And those people are dramatically improving. This is a very promising thing. They do have antibody testing. They're trying to get it rolled out. The hope is that it'll start coming to the different hospitals in the next week. And then what my hope would be is they start testing the first line responders, the EMS, the doctors, the nurses first, for multitudes of reasons. One, it'll identify which one of us have already been exposed. And two, I'm pretty sure most of us would stand in line to donate plasma to those patients, and that would help with that. Once we can kind of identify who's been affected or not, you can start rolling that out to the general population. You get an idea of the prevalence of the disease better, who is been asymptomatic and had this, who's gotten over it. That allows it, and you increase our rapid testing. Now, our hospital finally got the rapid testing. There, I think in the U.S. it's Abbott testing, and we have not a lot of them. But now, if someone comes in labor and they're about to birth a baby and they have COVID symptoms, I know if they are, and we can appropriately put them in the right part of our hospital. Or if I need to put a tube down someone's throat, I can get a 30-minute rapid test and determine it. Yeah, this person is that. I need to go in the full like spacesuit, you know. So as that becomes more available, as we can test, as we can track, as we can get our data more, I think that that's how we open back up society, because then we can go back from we can't figure out who has it, so everybody stays away, to we have a general idea of who's immune, who's not, and we can track it. And our vulnerable populations, nursing home, elderly, immunocompromised, those folks will still probably have to social isolate, but younger folks and other people can start coming out. Now, realistically, I don't think that that's probably going to happen fully until the end of May, just by the logistics of it. So we're still looking at a couple more weeks where we're going to be locked down at least. But that, I think, is our best bet to get out of this. And, you know, I'm really, really hoping that comes sooner rather than later, because I think that's a very important thing. Someone had mentioned, and I can't find the comment here, but someone had asked in the previous comment, oh, that comes doesn't reflect our current viral loads. Yeah. Yeah, so someone was saying that the testing doesn't, you know, necessarily look at the current viral loads. Yeah, there's a whole slew of issues with the testing we're still working out. Someone had mentioned on one of the comments from my previous video that, you know, I had been sick at the end of February, and do I think that was coronavirus or COVID? And yes and no. This is a loaded and complicated thing. So when I was sick pre my ski trip at the end of February, I don't think that was coronavirus or COVID. That was just a upper respiratory infection. I had a lot of like congestion, and my husband had the same thing, but no one else in our family had it. And his lasted like 2 days. And I think had I not gone on my trip, I probably would have been over in 2 days as well. When I got back, I felt much better. The altitude really got to me when I was there, and I have issues with altitude in general, and so it made my condition so much worse. But when I got home, I felt dramatically better. About 3 to 4 days later, my daughter came home from school with a fever, and then my son got the fever the next day. And that illness in the first week of March, I am actually pretty suspicious that we might have had it. And the reason is that my husband only got chills, and he got shortness of breath and cough. I got kind of all of it. I got shortness of breath, cough, nausea, body aches, chills, fatigue. My child was sick for like 3 days, and then she was fine. My son was barely sick for a day. It took my nanny, who's in her 50s, out for a good solid week. Like she couldn't get out of bed. She had high fevers, all of that stuff. And then she later told me that her son got an illness as well at the same time as her, fever and feeling bad for a day or two. What really was weird about it is, when I haven't had a fever in years. I'm an ER doctor. I tend to not get sick that often, believe it or not. And when I do get sick, it's usually minor, especially not with fever. The last time I had a fever was when I was pregnant. I just don't get fevers that often. And we've never had an illness run through our entire family. It usually hits one or two of us, three or four of us, but it has never hit everybody, including my nanny and then her family. And what was also weird is that Some of us were more hit than others. And then about a week after the initial symptoms, when both my husband and I thought we were better, we had about a week of persistent tachycardia, PVCs. That's where you feel like your heart is jumping, and like flip flopping. It's like a weird electrical activity with your heart. And I actually had some moments where I could not breathe. And I woke up and I remember asking my husband to listen to my lungs because I felt so tight. And I thought it was because I had mowed the lawn. Now, in hindsight, I think that probably was it, but I was off for a good week around that period of time, and I wasn't working a ton when I like was ill, and so it didn't dawn on me. And now I look back at it, it might be, and that's why I'm curious about the antibody testing, because if that's the case, then that's huge. Then I don't have to worry as much when I interact with these patients. And it also worries me because that was in the time when we were not widely testing, when our criteria in our hospital was very, very tight, and we didn't think there was community spread. I worried there was community spread, but our hospital system and most of the people were like, no, there's no community spread here. And not 1 week later, I diagnosed my first coronavirus patient, and they didn't meet all the criteria for our hospital, and I pushed to get him the testing, and then the next day we found out that there was community spread. And when you extrapolate back when that person probably was exposed, it was around the same time that my entire family got it. And we're pretty sure my daughter brought it home from school because half of her classmates went out, and I kept my daughter away from school when all this was going on, when she was ill. So I'm starting to think that is what was going on. Now, what that tells me is it was probably more widespread in our area. Now that I look back, I think that there's a lot more people that had it that didn't realize it. And I think that's the case in a lot of places. I mean, Washington and New York are kind of prime examples of how they just didn't realize it was there until it was too bad. Luckily, most of us in middle America have locked down early enough that I think we're going to see a good outcome from that, and that's good. So, trying to think other stuff to go over. I think those were the big points. Oh, treatments. That was the last thing I wanted to kind of go over. I did a little bit more research about treatments. People have been asking about that as well. We still don't have great treatments. The most promising is the plasma from the antibodies from the previous patients, but that is still very, very like early in its phases of studies. We need to do that correctly. We need to leave it to the centers that know what they're doing with it, and then roll it out carefully because obviously people's bloods has to be checked. We need to make sure there's correct amounts of antibodies and all this stuff. Okay, so that is the most promising. The other promising drug that they're starting to see is remdesivir, which is one that's very hard to get your hands on. It was developed for Ebola. It is in trials, and people basically, it's only given to those folks that are about to die. Several of our patients in my hospital, we tried to get it. We could not get our hands on it. And, some of our patients did better and some didn't, regardless of that. Now, the big thing all over the media is hydroxychloroquine, or Plaquenil is the other name for it. It's an old malaria medication. It's used oftentimes in folks with lupus. It is not a benign drug. And so far, the studies that have come out from it that were the basis of why the media is going crazy about it were not good. They were not well done studies. They were done in France, and they were very faulty and questionable. And most people in medicine are not feeling very good about this medicine. It is not a benign medicine. Don't believe the news media when they say there's nothing to lose with it. There is a lot to lose with this medicine. It causes eye issues. You have to have your eyes checked pretty frequently. And when you combine it with a drug like azithromycin, which is an antibiotic, it can do something called prolonged QT. What that means is it makes your rhythm in your heart, a specific rhythm, lengthen out, and that can actually prone you to sudden cardiac death. Now, that is a very, very rare risk, but unfortunately, these folks also are having sudden cardiac death who have COVID that are really ill. And so this is not a benign thing in them. Now, we've been using it on people that get admitted that aren't sick. And honestly, in our limited amount of patients, we're not seeing much improvement. And from talking to my other colleagues at other places, it's kind of the same thing. There have been certain institutions that have outright just stopped using it because they're seeing more harm than good. So, I have my family asking about it. My dad is on Plaquenil for lupus. That's where you see a lot of people on it. And my mom is hopeful that this drug is very, very helpful. And I have to keep telling her that right now it's not looking so great. And I do wish that the news media and the politicians on both sides would stop toting treatments. I think that that's harmful because people get hooked and latched onto one thing, and it's not necessarily the best thing. And so I wish they would let the physicians figure it out and go from there because it is what it is. But anyway, that's a big pet peeve of mine right now, with the news media and everything. And I'm sure most people in healthcare feel the same way I do, that they should not be commenting on this stuff. They can show the studies, but that's kind of how I feel. Um, there was one other thing I was going to go over, but I completely don't remember anymore now. I'll think of it later, I am sure. But that's kind of the gist. Um, yeah, so I go back to work tomorrow. I work a 12-hour shift. We'll see. I'll update you guys later this week. I'm gonna go on a whole string of night shifts at the end of next week, and I'm really interested to see how things will go. The one I remembered what other thing I wanted to talk to you guys about. There is some new interesting data about this virus and the mechanism of how it interacts with our body, and it is very interesting. So we had previously thought that this caused ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome. That is a overreaction of the body, usually to a virus. We see it in influenza occasionally, where basically you go into like a cytokine storm, and your immune system basically overreacts and floods your lungs with fluids, and then your lungs cannot expand and contract very well, and it's hard to ventilate the patients, and they basically choke to death and die. There's been some latest things coming out. Physicians have been noticing that these people coming in don't look like they're struggling to breathe, but their oxygen saturations are really, really low, but they look okay as long as they're not doing stuff. And this doesn't fit with ARDS. And it's really disconcerting. And what they're starting to see and they think is going on, and the prelim data is starting to show that this may actually be less affecting the lungs as a straight up ARDS and pneumonia, and more affecting our red blood cells and not allowing the hemoglobin to bind oxygen. And then you get this cascade of events of multi organ failure. Your liver fails, your heart fails, your lungs get edematous and fail. They're also seeing people become what's the term? Microthrombus is the term. So basically, their blood becomes very likely to cause little clots, and they get little clots in different parts of their body, and that can cause like a PE, which is a pulmonary embolism that can affect their oxygenation. So these are very different than what we first found out about this virus when the data was coming out of China and Italy and all those other places. And if that's the case, that's why a lot of our modalities and putting people on ventilators for weeks, and then they seem to be doing better, and then you pull them off and then they just die. That makes sense. That also means that maybe we won't have to use as many ventilators. Maybe we can try to use non-invasive type of ventilation to help a little bit better with this. So that is interesting and ever evolving. And if we can get a better grasp on this, I think we could better tailor our treatments. One viewer commented that it seemed like we were just kind of learning things as we went along, and that's actually very true. It changes day on a daily basis. I am bombarded with information from different sources and filtering through it and trying to understand what the latest greatest data is coming out. And I think all of us in healthcare are trying to do that, and it is like taking information from a fire hydrant, like drinking from a fire hydrant. There's so much coming at us, and you have to filter through so much of it. And one day it seems it's one thing, and then the next day you find something else out. And that is a very weird place to be. Nothing I feel like in medicine makes sense right now. Things that we used to do aren't working or harmful, and it's the whole way we're dealing with stuff is just, it's weird. It feels like I'm in a different country or different world, and I think that is very disconcerting and unsettling to a lot of us in healthcare. So All right. I think that's about it. Thanks everyone for watching, and I will be back. So I work I work tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I think, of next week. So I will try to do a one maybe on. Probably, I'll post up. It'll either be Friday or Saturday. I need to look on what time I work, and I'll do it like one of the days before I go to work. So if you guys have any questions or things you want to address, put them down in the comments below, and I'll try to address them in the next. And thank you everybody for commenting. I've tried to like kind of look as things are coming up here, but I'll look back through at everyone's comments when we're done here. But thanks everyone for watching. I'm gonna go to bed now, and I'll keep you guys updated. All right, bye.